In the summer of 1878, when typhoid fever swept through Harper County, Kansas, claiming 47 lives, the four Blackwood brothers seemed untouchable. Their strange immunity baffled doctors, yet what looked like divine favor soon revealed a far darker cost. The changes that followed were so grotesque that 3 physicians refused to submit written reports, and the Kansas State Medical Board quietly locked away every trace of the case. What began as a blessing twisted into something unholy. The local Methodist church went so far as to burn all references to the Blackwood family from its records. The brothers developed symptoms no medical text had ever described, symptoms that edged further from humanity with each passing day. By winter, neighbors whispered that the brothers no longer cast proper shadows. Their voices carried unnatural harmonics that left listeners bleeding from the ears, and their eyes shone backlight like the gaze of nocturnal beasts. The final sealed report, still classified to this day, allegedly contained one chilling line: subjects have transcended human biological classification before all documentation was destroyed. Tonight, nearly a century and a half later, we uncover why modern science still refuses to acknowledge what took place on that desolate farm, and why the truth about the Blackwood brothers may be more horrifying than any tale of the supernatural. But before we continue with the story of Ezra, Caleb, Josiah, and Abel Blackwood, I must ask you something. This channel isn't for everyone. It's only for those bold enough to face the mysteries others are too afraid to touch. If you count yourself among them, subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Do you dare to hear what really happened when faith and science collided on the Kansas plains? Now, let us step back to 1878, when faith and fear walked side by side. Cedar Ridge, Kansas, was then little more than a scattering of farms and ranches along windswept prairie crossroads. Fewer than 300 souls lived there, in a place where every neighbor knew the other's secrets, where a man's word was binding, and where Sunday services at the Methodist Church served both as worship and community gathering. It was a land of brutal contrasts. Winters of blizzards that swallowed entire homesteads, summers where crops withered in a single week of scorching heat. Hardship was seen as divine testing, prosperity as proof of heavenly favor. The very landscape encouraged such beliefs. Miles of golden wheat stretching to the horizon, interrupted only by the occasional farmhouse, windmill, or cottonwood grove along a creek. Above it all loomed the sky, vast, endless, and ever-changing. In storms, lightning flared for hours, turning the plains into a fleeting theater of light that revealed just how isolated each family truly was. In winter, the wind screamed across the flatlands with a voice almost human, carrying snow and cold fierce enough to kill a man lost between house and barn in minutes. The Blackwood brothers arrived in Cedar Ridge in the spring of 1872, purchasing 640 acres of prime farmland with inheritance from their late father's estate in Ohio. They sold everything they owned, packed 2 covered wagons, and journeyed west with the certainty of men answering a divine call. Ezra Blackwood, the eldest at 36, bore the natural authority of a man long accustomed to responsibility. Standing 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered from years of toil, he carried himself with a quiet dignity that inspired respect without demanding it. His scarred, weathered hands could calm a panicked horse as easily as they guided a plow. But it was his eyes that left the strongest impression, pale blue like frozen rivers. To those who met his gaze, it felt as though he saw through the surface straight into the soul, and often found it wanting. 2 years younger, Caleb acted as the family's calculating mind and financial steward. Where Ezra led through quiet authority, Caleb managed through precision and planning. He tracked crop yields, livestock sales, and weather cycles with a skill that impressed even seasoned farmers. His ledgers, written in neat, exact script, recorded every coin spent or earned, every bushel harvested, every cow bought or sold. Yet beneath his pragmatic surface burned the same fierce devotion that fueled his brothers. Caleb saw God's presence in all things, in the geometry of a wheat field, in the timing of rain, in the harmony of numbers themselves. Josiah, the third brother at 31, had received the most education. Before their father's death summoned him home, he studied theology, medicine, philosophy, and the natural sciences at Ohio Wesleyan University. His cherished library, over 200 volumes carefully packed for move, still lined the walls of his Kansas bedroom. Stacks of books and notes turned his quarters into more of a scholar's study than a farmer's room. The youngest, Abel, only 25, burned with zeal that sometimes unsettled even his devout brothers. Where Ezra applied faith through leadership, Caleb through order, and Josiah through study, Abel surrendered to it completely. He prayed for hours each day, often weeping in rapture. He fasted for days, claiming scripture and prayer alone sustained him. His devotion was raw, absolute, and unrelenting. Back in Ohio, Abel's fervor had earned him the nickname "Touched by the Spirit" among his fellow church members. Yet behind closed doors, some whispered that his passion verged on dangerous obsession. Unlike most families in Cedar Ridge who attended the modest Methodist church in town, a simple white building with a bell tower heard for miles, the Blackwood brothers built their own chapel on a hill overlooking their farm. The construction consumed much of their first year in Kansas. They quarried limestone from the creek, felled oak on the edge of their property, and shaped every beam and stone with their own hands. The chapel that rose from their labor reflected both their austerity and their devotion. 30 feet long, 20 feet wide, its limestone walls fitted with precision, and its roof shingled with hand-split oak. Inside, they had carved pews from walnut, their surfaces polished smooth with endless hours of careful work. The altar, hewn by their hands, bore Hebrew inscriptions Josiah had copied from his biblical texts. Tall east and west-facing windows bathed the interior in gold during sunrise and sunset prayers. Here, they held Sunday services according to what they called primitive Methodist principles, a stricter, harsher reading of Wesley's teachings that emphasized personal revelation, unmediated communion with God, and the priesthood of all believers. Their gatherings were marked by long silences, deep scriptural study, and what they called testimonies of the Spirit, where each brother shared the visions or insights he received during the week. Their daily rhythm reflected the same balance of faith and toil. At 4 each morning, they rose for an hour of silent prayer, watching the sun break over the eastern prairie. A plain breakfast of bread, milk, and whatever fruit was in season sustained them before the long day's work in the fields. Afternoons were spent tending livestock, repairing tools, and performing the endless chores a farm demanded. Yet every evening was reserved for spiritual practice, study, debate, prayer, often stretching past midnight. The brothers remained unmarried, dedicating themselves wholly to their land and their faith. Their 2-story farmhouse, finished in their second year, was sturdy but spare, its walls adorned with wooden plaques inscribed with scripture. Every room held at least one worn Bible, and many were stacked with the additional text Josiah considered essential for constant study. By the summer of 1878, the Blackwood farm stood as a model of both prosperity and devotion. Wheat fields rippled golden across the prairie. Cattle grazed on lush pasture. The grain silo overflowed, and their stone chapel testified to their unwavering belief. They had achieved everything they had envisioned when they left Ohio: independence, success, and the freedom to worship on their own terms. Among their neighbors, the brothers were respected yet regarded with unease. Their honesty in trade and their willingness to lend a hand during crises earned admiration, but their intensity, isolation, and the cold scrutiny of their pale blue eyes unsettled many. When they came into town every 2 weeks for supplies, they moved with quiet precision. Armed with detailed lists, they purchased what they needed swiftly and departed without lingering for gossip or small talk. Children stared at the 4 identical black beards, trimmed with almost ritual exactness, which gave the men a stern biblical appearance. Then, on July 15, 1878, Cedar Ridge was struck by its first case of typhoid fever. It began with Sarah Hartman, who with her husband Benjamin ran the general store. That morning she had seemed perfectly well, greeting customers cheerfully and chatting about the promising wheat harvest. By afternoon she was stricken, her skin blotched with the rose-colored rash doctors dreaded, her body burning with fever. Dr. Samuel Morrison, the county's lone physician, had just finished a grueling breech delivery at the Henderson farm when he was summoned. He arrived to find Sarah delirious, her temperature so high his thermometer barely registered it. Her husband, usually a steady man, paced in panic, wringing his hands, his voice breaking as he begged Morrison to save his wife of 23 years. "She was fine this morning, doctor," Benjamin repeated again and again, laughing at Tommy Henderson's foolish joke. Serving breakfast. How can a woman go from healthy to this in just hours? Morrison had seen typhoid before during his medical training in Philadelphia, but never like this. The disease typically crept in over days or weeks. Sarah's case, however, seemed to compress the entire course of infection into a single nightmarish day. Her fever blazed higher than any he had recorded in a living patient. Her delirium was violent and absolute. The rose-colored rash spread across Sarah Hartman's body in patterns so eerily symmetrical that they looked almost designed. Despite Dr. Morrison's desperate measures, cold compresses, doses of laudanum, and constant checks of her faltering pulse, she died shortly after midnight on July 16th. Yet even in death, her case unsettled him. Rigor set in far too quickly. Her skin took on a waxy sheen, less like decay and more like preservation, and her eyelids, though Morrison closed them repeatedly in accordance with proper procedure, refused to stay shut. Within a single day, 3 more cases surfaced in Cedar Ridge. The only connection seemed to be their reliance on the town's well, a source of clear, sweet water since the settlement's founding. But when Morrison inspected it, he found contamination. Runoff had somehow seeped past the carefully laid stone lining. The second victim was Heinrich Zimmerman, an old German farmer who had worked the same patch of land for 15 years. His illness mirrored Sarah's. Well, one morning, feverish by afternoon, dead before dawn. Yet in his final hours, Heinrich muttered in tongues no one recognized, words that sounded ancient, menacing, as though echoing from some forgotten age. The third and fourth deaths struck deepest. Emma and Ellen Patterson, 16-year-old twins and the brightest students at the county schoolhouse. They perished simultaneously, as though the disease itself had chosen to claim them together. Their father, James, later swore that in their final delirium they spoke in perfect unison, reciting what sounded like prayers, half Latin, half something not meant for human mouths. By August 1st, 14 lives had been lost. Morrison's notes documented patterns that defied medical science. Every victim died within 24 hours of their first symptom. Their fever soared beyond survivable levels. Their delirium was violent, uncanny, closer to possession than illness. Fear consumed Cedar Ridge. Families locked themselves indoors, leaving only for the most urgent needs. At the general store, now run by a grief-hollow Benjamin Hartman and his brother-in-law, conversations dwindled to hushed exchanges and darting glances. Even the Methodist church, once the beating heart of the community, stood nearly deserted on Sundays, as if gathering together might invite the plague inside. Though Morrison ordered the wells sealed and warned everyone to boil their water, the sickness spread in ways that mocked reason. Entire families were wiped out while their neighbors remained untouched. The victims seemed chosen, as though by a design no one could discern. It was into this landscape of dread that the Blackwood brothers stepped. For weeks, they had kept to their farm, untouched by the epidemic and true to their practice of avoiding unnecessary contact with the town. But on August 10th, Josiah announced to his brothers that God had spoken to him. "I have prayed for guidance," he told them at supper, "and the Lord has revealed that this pestilence is not merely a test of the town's faith, but of our own. We have been spared not for our safety, but to prove the power of true belief when trial comes." As always, their decision was swift, orderly, absolute. On August 11th, Josiah rode into Cedar Ridge and offered their aid to Dr. Morrison, ostensibly to care for the sick. Yet his true purpose, shared only with his brothers, was more radical. He intended to place himself directly in the path of the disease, to welcome it, and through it prove himself a vessel of divine will. His first visit was to the home of Thomas Fletcher, the blacksmith, whose 8-year-old son Timothy had been seized by fever and convulsions the night before. When Josiah entered, The family was gathered in desperate prayer around the boy's bed. What followed remained etched in every witness's memory, though their accounts differed. The youngest Blackwood knelt beside Timothy and laid his hands on the child's burning forehead. But instead of pleading for the fever to break, Josiah prayed a darker prayer. Lord God, his voice rang with unnatural force, if this child must suffer, let that suffering be poured into me and my brothers. Let us bear the weight he cannot carry. Make us into what we must become to serve your will. Take his life in the fire and place it into our keeping. As he spoke, those who watched swore his hands seemed to radiate heat of their own. Timothy's convulsions eased. His fever broke, and for the first time in hours, the boy opened his eyes and spoke in his own clear voice. Timothy Fletcher asked for water and complained of hunger. The suddenness of his recovery sent Thomas Fletcher to his knees, weeping and praising God for what he believed to be a miracle. But those who observed Josiah during those same moments noticed something far less comforting. As the boy cooled, Josiah's own body heated, his skin flushing as though fever burned beneath it. His pale Blackwood blue eyes began to show threads of molten gold, shifting and glimmering like liquid metal. When he finally rose on the child's bedside, his movements were careful, deliberate, as though each step required conscious restraint. Dr. Morrison, summoned to confirm what the Fletchers called divine intervention, examined both patients with growing unease. Timothy's fever had vanished without a trace, yet Josiah displayed advanced symptoms of disease, symptoms developing far faster than any medical text could explain. Over the next 2 days, Josiah went from house to house, visiting every stricken family. At each bedside, he repeated the same ritual, laying hands on the feverish and calling for their suffering to pass into himself and his brothers. Again and again, the afflicted recovered in sudden, startling reversals, and with each one, Josiah weakened. By the time he returned to farm on August 13th, he was consumed by fever and displaying conditions no physician had ever described. Yet he remained unshaken. "This is not disease," he insisted to his increasingly unsettled brothers. "This is refinement. The Lord burns away what is human, so that what remains may serve eternal purpose." Within hours, all 4 Blackwood brothers began to exhibit the same terrifying changes. Dr. Morrison's first full examination of the brothers on August 18th would mark the most extraordinary and troubling moment of his career. The heat that day was unbearable. As Morrison guided his horse cart along the dry prairie road, the air wavered in shimmering waves, and the farmhouse ahead looked like a mirage. Yet as he neared, he noticed disturbing inconsistencies. The Blackwood fields stood lush and green while neighboring crops withered in drought, and their cattle grazed sleek and well-fed despite pastures elsewhere turning to dust. Ezra answered the door. The sight of him nearly stopped Morrison in his tracks. The eldest brother's skin had become translucent, revealing the lattice of veins beneath, but the blood within them shone gold, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed independent of his heartbeat. "Dr. Morrison," Ezra greeted him, his familiar voice now resonant with strange harmonic undertones that vibrated in Morrison's chest like struck chords. "We have been waiting. The transformation is almost complete, and we need a witness so that others may understand." Inside, the 4 brothers sat arranged in geometric precision around the room, their positions too exact to be casual. They breathed, they watched him, but their altered forms stretched the definition of human. Morrison's journal recorded the impossibility. Ezra's temperature reached 107 degrees, yet he conversed with perfect lucidity. Caleb's pulse was so faint it was nearly absent, but he moved without fatigue. Josiah inhaled only once every several minutes, yet showed no oxygen deprivation. Abel radiated cold to the touch, though his body burned with fever's flush. Caleb's condition horrified him most of all. The rose-colored rash of typhoid covered his skin, but it was no longer random. It had organized into shifting geometric designs, resembling equations traced in living flesh. As Morrison watched, the figures rearranged themselves. "The calculations resolve," Caleb intoned, his voice interlaced with Ezra's in eerie harmony. "Matter with spirit. time with eternity, humanity with divinity. We are becoming the proofs of the theorems men have only begun to dream. Josiah's metamorphosis was equally uncanny. His skin had transformed into something resembling ancient parchment, inscribed with writing, Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and other shifting sigils Morrison couldn't identify. When Josiah spoke, the sound no longer issued from his mouth alone. His words resonated from multiple corners of the room at once, surrounding the listener in a chorus not entirely human. Josiah's words seemed to issue from every direction at once, creating the impression of a hidden choir speaking through him. "Doctor," he said, "we have uncovered truths your medicine cannot grasp. We are recording these revelations so future generations will understand the divine transformation taking place." Of the four brothers, Abel's metamorphosis was the most startling to behold. His entire body gave off a soft radiance that illuminated the room with an otherworldly light. It wasn't harsh, but it was deeply unnatural, a cold, blue-white glow that seemed to radiate from within his very bones. His eyes blazed with unbroken brilliance, void of iris or pupil, shining like twin stars set in human flesh. "We no longer need food," Abel told Morrison, his voice echoing both inside the farmhouse and from some vast, unreachable distance. "We draw life from sources science has yet to discover. We are becoming something new, suspended between the mortal and the eternal." When Morrison attempted to record his observations, the brothers resisted. They insisted there was no sickness, but a sacred gift. They spoke of holy fire burning away the human, leaving vessels made fit for God's work. But Morrison's medical instincts rebelled. He recognized nothing divine in what he saw. Their symptoms matched no known illness, and the synchronized nature of their changes suggested something darker, perhaps poisoning from tainted grain or well water. Reactions in Cedar Ridge were divided. Reverend Marcus Thorne and his Methodist congregation declared the brothers' survival miraculous, and pilgrims began to visit the farm to witness the supposed hand of God. Others, especially those who had buried loved ones, reacted with suspicion and dread. "It ain't right," muttered Jacob Steinberg, who had lost his wife and children within a week. "Why should they live when decent folk are taken? And look at them, they ain't blessed, they're wrong. Just standing near them makes my skin crawl." The Blackwoods did little to ease fears. They carried on tending their fields, working with uncanny precision, moving as if guided by silent commands. Neighbors reported seeing them motionless in their wheat for hours, their faces tilted to the heavens as though listening to a voice no one else could hear. Their worship, too, became something alien. Once private, their nightly prayers now echoed across the prairie, haunting, beautiful, yet profoundly unsettling. For voices intertwined in impossible harmonies, sounds no human throat should have been able to produce. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson later swore to Morrison that she had approached the chapel one night, drawn by the strange singing. "I got within 50 yards, she said, and something pushed me back, not with hands, but inside my head, telling me to turn around. Doctor, those boys are changed in ways that ain't natural." By September, the epidemic itself had waned. The poison well was sealed, clean water secured, and Cedar Ridge slowly returned to life. Yet the mystery of the Blackwoods only deepened. Morrison visited weekly, under the guise of physician, though in truth he came as a witness. What he observed unsettled not only his medical training, but his very sanity. Ezra's temperature stabilized at 106.7 degrees Fahrenheit, impossible for human survival. Yet he suffered no damage, no fever confusion. His eyes glowed like molten gold, shifting and swirling with every glance. When he spoke, his words carried such gravity that people found themselves nodding along, even when he voiced impossibilities. "You measure us with tools made for men," Ezra told him calmly, "but we are no longer bound by the laws your science can test. Our bodies now follow principles not yet revealed to mankind." Caleb's markings had continued to evolve, forming complex designs that seemed almost like script. Morrison sketched them and sent his drawings to scholars, but no one could identify the shifting symbols. Stranger still, the patterns moved, slowly crawling across Caleb's skin, rearranging themselves into new configurations every few days. When Morrison attempted a blood draw, what emerged was no blood at all. The thick, golden substance pulsed with intent, flowing not with pressure but as though alive. Our circulation has been rewritten, Caleb explained, watching Morrison's unease with quiet satisfaction. This fluid carries more than oxygen and nutrients. It carries information and power beyond matter itself. Josiah's transformation had gone even further. His voice no longer belonged to him alone. It emanated from every corner of the room, vibrating through the very air, leaving Morrison dizzy and disoriented. The script on Josiah's skin was not fixed, but living, constantly being written by unseen hands. Morrison watched in horror as fresh words appeared before his eyes, inked by a force he could not comprehend. Along Josiah's arms and chest, symbols and sentences appeared in real time, forming coherent paragraphs that seemed to comment directly on Morrison's observations. The content was unsettlingly precise, describing his thoughts and reactions as though Josiah could read his mind. "We are becoming living books," Josiah said, his multidirectional voice spinning Morrison into vertigo. "Repositories of knowledge spanning both human learning and divine revelation. Our transformation encodes wisdom directly into our very flesh." Abel's phosphorescence had intensified, bathing entire rooms in a pale, unearthly glow. Yet his illumination was only part of the strangeness. He seemed to perceive realities beyond human comprehension, predicting weather days in advance, locating lost items without searching, sensing visitors before they approached. During one examination, Abel correctly identified the contents of Morrison's medical bag without opening it, described a condition of horse's stable half a mile away, and even appeared aware of conversations in Cedar Ridge, 3 miles distant. "Our senses have been opened to perceive what mortals cannot," Abel explained, his luminous eyes somehow radiating warmth despite their alien brilliance. "We see across impossible distances. We hear sounds beyond the normal range of hearing." The brothers' collective behavior had shifted in ways that suggested they were evolving beyond humanity. They moved in perfect synchronicity, completing one another's sentences, responding to unspoken cues. Their need for sleep and food had diminished drastically. Morrison noted they consumed barely half the calories of ordinary men and seemed content with only 2 to 3 hours of rest per night. Most alarming were the visions they claimed to receive, divine revelations detailing the future of their community, warnings of disasters, and instructions to prepare their neighbors for an unknown calamity. These messages were meticulously recorded in leather-bound journals, written in a script unfamiliar to any scholar. Initial fascination from the townspeople soon curdled into fear. Children were forbidden near the Blackwood property, and adults crossed themselves when passing the brothers in town. Even the Methodist Church, which had once celebrated their miraculous survival, began to withdraw. Reverend Thorne confided to Morrison, "I fear that in their zeal to serve the Lord, they may have opened themselves to forces that are not entirely heavenly. There's something in their eyes now, knowledge that no mortal should possess." By October 1878, the Blackwoods' metamorphosis had reached a point where they could no longer be considered fully human. Yet they remained lucid, articulate, and deliberate, describing themselves as purified vessels chosen to act as intermediaries between the divine and mortal worlds. Morrison's journal entries reflect a man teetering on the edge of reason, struggling to reconcile his medical training with what he was witnessing. Correspondence with colleagues in Kansas City and Chicago yielded only confusion and frustration. "No physician I have consulted has ever seen anything resembling the Blackwood's condition," he wrote. "Their physiology is impossible, and yet I observe it with my own eyes. I question my own sanity, or whether human biology harbors secrets we are only beginning to glimpse." The breaking point came on October 15th, when young Sarah Preston, daughter of a local farmer, disappeared while playing near the Blackwood property. 3 hours later, her parents found her in the Blackwood chapel, sitting serenely as if in trance. She claimed the brothers had shown her visions of angels and whispered wondrous secrets about heaven. But Morrison's examination revealed terrifying signs. Her temperature had spiked to 103 degrees Fahrenheit, and her eyes had begun to glow with the same golden hue seen in Ezra. Terrified, her father pleaded, "You must stop this, doctor. Those men, or whatever they become, they're spreading their curse to our children. My little girl talks of joining them, learning things no 7-year-old should know." Morrison confirmed her condition was real. The fever and strange glow matched the brother's transformation, and the child's mind displayed knowledge far beyond her years, medical, theological, and otherwise. Confronted with the possibility that the Blackwood's condition could be contagious, Morrison made a decision that would haunt him forever. He contacted the Kansas State Medical Board and Regional Health Authority, requesting immediate investigation. When officials arrived, the evidence was so disturbing that they chose suppression over study. Dr. James Patterson, the state medical examiner, spent 3 days at the Blackwood farm in late October. His official report, sealed by the state board, reportedly contained observations that defied all contemporary medical knowledge and posed public safety concerns. The report remains classified to this day. Patterson's private letters to his wife, discovered decades later, reveal the extent of his horror. "I have seen things that challenge not only our understanding of disease and human physiology, but the very nature of life itself." The Blackwood brothers were no longer fully human, yet neither were they dead. They existed in some intermediate state, one that science could neither explain nor dare acknowledge. Tensions in Cedar Ridge escalated when families reported that children were disappearing from their beds at night, only to be found hours later standing silently in the fields surrounding the Blackwood chapel. The children had no memory of how they had arrived, yet they returned with knowledge and abilities that left their parents shaken. If you're feeling the chill of this story, share it with someone who loves dark mysteries. Hit like and subscribe to uncover more stories like this. Mayor William Harrison called a town meeting on October 25th to confront what many residents now viewed as a crisis. Nearly every adult attended. The town was deeply divided. Some considered the brothers miraculous healers. Others saw them as dangerous, unnatural influences. Dr. Morrison was summoned to provide a medical assessment, but his testimony only heightened fear and confusion. "I have observed physiological changes in the Blackwood brothers that defy all understanding of human biology," Morrison told the assembly. "Their vital signs are consistently abnormal, yet they show no illness. Their abilities surpass human limitations, yet they remain fully conscious. I cannot classify this as a disease. They do not suffer, nor can I call it improvement, for it represents a fundamental alteration of human nature." The meeting concluded with a grim resolution. A committee, Mayor Harrison, Reverend Thorne, Thomas Preston, and Dr. Morrison, would visit the Blackwood farm and demand that the brothers either reverse their transformation or leave Cedar Ridge forever. They were given 1 week to comply. On November 1st, 1878, under a leaden sky heavy with the promise of winter, the delegation arrived at the Blackwood farm. Morrison rode alongside the mayor, the Reverend, and Preston, each lost in apprehension over what awaited them. From a distance, the farmhouse appeared ordinary, but as they approached, subtle signs confirmed Morrison's growing dread. The wheat fields, long past harvest, remained tall and golden. The cattle grazed in uncanny, geometric patterns. The chapel atop the hill pulsed with faint luminescence, and ethereal voices could be heard, harmonizing in melodies far more complex than human vocal cords could produce. The farmhouse door opened to reveal young Sarah Preston. Her father froze. She radiated the golden glow of the Blackwoods, her eyes holding the same translucent, otherworldly quality. "Hello, Papa," Sarah said, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones that had become characteristic of the brothers' transformation. "They've been expecting you. They're waiting in the chapel and are ready to answer all your questions." As the delegation walked toward the chapel, reality itself seemed to shift. The ground vibrated subtly beneath their feet. The air shimmered with patterns like heat waves, yet it felt cool to the touch. Birds moved in impossible formations, creating geometric designs that shifted with their progress. Inside the chapel, the four brothers were arranged in a perfect square around the altar, positioned with mathematical precision. Their transformation had advanced far beyond anything Morrison had seen before. Skin completely translucent revealed internal structures that bore no resemblance to human anatomy. Their eyes were liquid gold, deep and impossible, reflecting a knowledge beyond the mortal realm. "Welcome," Ezra said, though his voice seemed to emanate from all four brothers at once. "We anticipated your concerns. You fear what we have become and the influence we wield in your community. Your fears are reasonable, and we do not dismiss them lightly." Mayor Harrison delivered the town's ultimatum. The brothers must either return to their human condition or leave Cedar Ridge permanently. Caleb's voice, harmonizing perfectly with Ezra's, responded, "Mr. Mayor, your request is impossible. The transformation we have undergone cannot be reversed. No more than a butterfly can return to being a caterpillar. We have moved beyond human existence. There's no path backward from where we now stand." Reverend Thorne attempted to appeal to the spiritual dimension, arguing that the brothers had departed from God's intended design for mankind. He quoted scripture on the sanctity of the human form and the dangers of seeking knowledge beyond divine provision. Josiah spoke next, his voice seeming to echo from multiple points at once, challenging the very assumptions of human limitation and divine will. Paused, his hand trembling over the samples he had taken. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like the prairie sky before a storm. To join the Blackwood brothers would mean leaving behind everything he knew: family, friends, the boundaries of human understanding, and stepping into a reality where consciousness, matter, and spirit were fused in ways no human mind had ever endured. He looked at their eyes, Ezra's golden pools, Josiah's script-covered skin, Caleb's shifting geometric patterns, Abel's luminous glow, and felt the pull of knowledge so vast it threatened to unravel his identity. Morrison began, voice tight with awe and fear, "I cannot abandon my humanity. Not yet. The world still needs me as I am." Abel's phosphorescent glow dimmed slightly, yet there was no malice in his expression. "Then you will remain," he said, his voice both near and impossibly far, "to witness, to record, to understand as much as a mortal may. But remember, knowledge has a cost, and the door to transformation will not wait forever." Sarah Preston, standing nearby with her own golden eyes, touched her father's arm gently. "Papa," she said softly, "you will see the truth, even if you do not follow it. Some things must be observed before they can be understood. You've been given the gift of witnessing." Morrison exhaled, a shudder running through him. He understood that he had glimpsed the future of human potential, and also its danger. The brothers, and now Sarah, were living proof of what lay beyond ordinary flesh and mind, a threshold humanity was not yet ready to cross. The delegation left the Blackwood farm that day in stunned silence. Cedar Ridge would never be the same. The wheat fields continued to shimmer unnaturally. The chapel pulsed with faint, rhythmic light, and the brothers moved among their property with a harmony that defied mortal comprehension. Dr. Morrison returned to his home, carrying his journals, his blood samples, and a secret understanding that would haunt him forever. Humanity had encountered something that could not be measured, classified, or contained. And in the quiet of the night, he sometimes swore he could still hear the harmonic voices echoing from the Blackwood chapel, reminding him that life and its potential was far more mysterious than anyone dared imagine. This is a chilling and masterfully crafted story, one that blends historical fiction, supernatural horror, and speculative science in a way that leaves a lingering sense of unease. The narrative escalates steadily from a seemingly ordinary typhoid epidemic into a full-blown existential and metaphysical crisis, with the Blackwood brothers' transformation serving as both the horrifying climax and the philosophical heart of the tale. What stands out most? The transformation theme. The brothers evolve beyond human limitations, challenging notions of life, death, and consciousness. Their evolution is described with vivid physiological and metaphysical detail that makes it feel simultaneously plausible and terrifying. The moral and ethical tension. Dr. Morrison's struggle between scientific duty and personal survival adds depth, highlighting the human cost of encountering the unknowable. Atmosphere and dread. Cedar Ridge itself becomes a character, with haunted landscape, strange lights, and lingering sense of dread reinforcing the story's tension. Open-ended mystery. The story ends on a note of unresolved awe. The Blackwood brothers' legacy continues to haunt the world, suggesting that some knowledge is too dangerous to possess, leaving readers unsettled and contemplative. The way it mixes science, theology, and horror makes it feel like a lost manuscript from the 19th century, a story that could plausibly be part of forbidden medical and occult records.